Let's please welcome these two to the microphone. I do apologize for butchering the names and the time. Let's give them a round of applause. Let them hear you.
Do you want us to try to get back on track here and kind of go fast? Great. Okay. With the lights off, I can't see if anybody's actually out there. Can this go? Can you hear me? Is this loud enough? I can't tell if it's very loud. Talk louder. No, I'm good. Okay. Well, Poonam and I are working on an EPA grant, so it's a climate action planning grant, so we thought we'd talk about that program that EPA runs and a little bit about planning action grants. But it's really a way for us to kind of make some comments about our observations about what really makes sense and what maybe you want to think about a little bit more in Indian country, because the climate action plans are a way to get funding for certain kinds of projects. So that's really why we're talking about it. So I work for tribal sovereign resiliency partners, and we work exclusively in Indian country. We do a lot of planning. We do energy work, but we have a program that we call the 360 Reservation, or the SMART Reservation, and I want to talk about that a little bit later, because we step back and look at the whole reservation, not just one aspect of it, and energy is only one aspect of it. And I work closely with Poonam, and let me have her talk about Ascent and introduce herself.
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. My name is Poonam Boparai. I'm a principal with a firm called Ascent Environmental, and we're a planning and environmental consulting firm. We do a lot of work in the space of California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA and NEPA, urban design and planning, natural resources planning, and climate action and adaptation planning. So that is the practice I'm primarily part of. And my past experience, I have a background in environmental engineering, focus on air quality and climate science. And most of my climate action planning work has been with local governments, municipalities, special districts like water districts, and ports. And I've only recently had the privilege of working with tribes. Ed mentioned some of the projects we're working on. We're doing priority and comprehensive climate action plans for the Rincon Band in the Southern California region, as well as with Tejon in Central Valley of California. And I'll also just add, it's my first time at this conference, and I have to say it's one of the most welcoming and friendly groups I've encountered at a conference. So thank you for having us here. And you know, I'm approaching this work with a lot of humility and inquisitiveness, because we have the technical expertise, but you all know your communities really well and can help guide the process too. Very grateful to be here.
Great, thank you. So in addition to doing work in tribal country, I'm also a professor at George Washington University. I run a professional education program there, so I may get a little bit academic. I was here last year, and I ran 3 panels, actually back-to-back on one day. So I'd say today is really easy. I'm only running one panel, so I kind of feel like this is going to be kind of easy. Maybe we can get us back on track too, because we are well behind. Here's what we're going to talk about today. Why should you care about climate action plans? What's this all about? What's in it for tribal governments? And there are some benefits by doing and paying attention to climate action plans. I'm going to explain what that is, and then turn it over to Poonam, who's really going to do a deeper dive into what it's all about and what the elements are. What is necessary in the CAP? She's going to talk about that, and then I'm going to step back in and talk about solutions. And I'm going to be quick about that, because you heard about solutions all day today. We don't have to go through that again. Actually, going the last day makes it kind of easy on us, because I don't want to repeat what happened during the conference. So we can try to eliminate a lot of that and not go back over it. I'll briefly talk about funding opportunities, but really from a standpoint of caution rather than they're out there. They are out there, you know that. Tommy Johns talked about it. Some of the other speakers, Pilar talked about it quite a lot. But there's some real cautions here that I really want to talk about in terms of the competitiveness of them. And then I really want to talk about planning, because what we do is planning. Energy is part of the plan, but it isn't the whole plan. If you're an energy engineer, an energy professional, every project looks like an energy project. If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I just say be careful here. Energy is really an economic development and a social question. It's not an energy as an end result. There are other things going on which energy must fit in. Energy can't be the lead. So let me just caution there. So I'd say I'm going to do a lot of cautions as we go through here. So I'd say the difference of what you're going to hear today is not the rah-rah about energy, but sort of cautions about how you approach it. And let me turn that over to Poonam, who will she's really the expert on climate action planning. Am I doing this one? Why should you care? Oh, I'm doing this one. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is very quick. So what is it? What is a climate action plan? It's a plan for measuring and reducing greenhouse gases and related climate impacts. In a lot of ways, we don't have an energy problem. We get plenty of energy, and because of fracking, we've got a lot of natural gas. So this is really not about energy. It's really about the real problem with energy, with fossil fuels, which is greenhouse gases. So when you burn the fuels, you get carbon dioxide and other things that go up into the atmosphere, but they don't escape. They don't go back up. The sunlight came in, heated things, photosynthesis took place, carbon comes up, but it doesn't go out. So what that does is it captures more heat as the sun comes through. And that's the problem. Plus other things that come out of the burning of fuel. So there are other noxious components that come out, so that we have a greenhouse gas problem, heating problem, and then we also have a health problem because those are toxic chemicals that come out of here. So that's what the problem is. Energy is not our problem. It's the result of burning the energy that's the problem. And this is where it comes from: tailpipes. It comes from methane leaks. It comes from burning fossil fuel for coal and for heating. And really, the problem with energy is really not the source of energy. Even though this is bad, it's really the amount of energy. If we could just slice the amount of energy in half, we would not really have a greenhouse gas problem, because the natural regenerative capabilities of the Earth could overtake that and absorb it. The Earth is a great levelizer, but we are overcoming that. We are overburdening the Earth. So it's not so much, it is the source of energy that is a problem, but it's really the amount of energy. We have an industrial society based on free, easily transportable, highly dense energy, fossil fuels, and that's what we built it on. I'm not going to go too much into that, but if you have any questions, ask me about that a little bit later. So what else is the problem besides climate change? It's the health impacts. All of that smoke coming out of there, the wood from for your stoves, sitting in your house with wood from your stoves, methane that you burned in your stoves in your house. Those all create health problems. So we need to pay attention to that. So reducing greenhouse gases, the cost, the amount of money the EPA and others are putting into doing climate action plans to reduce greenhouse gases gives us a chance to reduce our energy and reduce the health impacts of the greenhouse gases. So there's 4 things that Poonam is going to go into in more detail, 4 ways that tribes will benefit by doing climate action plans. That's reducing climate change, which we all want to do, exposure to toxic gases, reducing energy costs, because if you reduce greenhouse gases, you reduce the amount of energy, you're reducing the cost of energy. That's the big deal. And then there's a lot of funding to do this. So let me now so this is the grant we're talking about. It's called the climate pollution reduction grant. That's quite a mouthful, and it's actually a big deal. A lot of money are allocated to tribes. It's an allocation, not a grant competition. I'm going to talk about competitions versus allocations a little later, and then also there's a follow-on implementation grant, which is much bigger. So Poonam.
Great, thank you, Ed. I'm just curious if folks in the room, have you all or your tribal governments pursued the planning grant under CPRG, Climate Pollution Reduction Grants? Okay, I see a few hands up. That's good. It was mentioned yesterday in one of the presentations that this allocation is really the precursor to these implementation grants. So if you have pursued the planning grant and are developing these climate action plans, you're eligible for funding for these implementation projects. And those are competitive, and there's 2 competitions. There's a tribal specific and a general competition. You can apply in both. But the nice thing about these is you saw a lot of the funding sources that are focused on energy yesterday. Your climate action plan is more comprehensive, so it covers sources of greenhouse gases and infrastructure beyond energy as well. So one of the tribes we're working with actually wants to pursue a grant to update their wastewater treatment plant. So that's a project that would be eligible under this CPRG program. You could also have projects like tree planting. So it's a much more comprehensive space. So if you are interested in projects beyond sort of the energy infrastructure, this would be a place to look. And hopefully there's going to be more of this funding. I know the planning grant, if you did not pursue the implementation grant, is not available, but we're hoping there'll be a future cycle where that's possible. So I'll cover a little bit of the nuts and bolts of climate action planning. And as I said, we've done this work for entities mostly across California for several years. So there's a good framework that can be used to develop these plans. The climate action planning process is a sequential, somewhat iterative process. You can have plans that are exclusively focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, so sort of the mitigation side, or you can also have plans that address adaptation, so really preparing for the hazards associated with climate change. This presentation is more focused on greenhouse gases because that's what the grant is about, but happy to talk about the adaptation piece later if you all are interested. So the process itself, any planning exercise, you start with where you are. So you set your baseline, see where you are, because that will determine where you need to go. So you start with a baseline assessment. I'll cover that in a minute. You establish goals. There's reduction goals for greenhouse gases that have been proposed by federal governments, state governments, even at the international level. So that can be a place to look, or you can decide what makes sense for your tribe and your reservation. So there's a lot of flexibility there. Once you have the goals, you can establish strategies, actions to meet those goals, and we'll cover those details in a minute. And then you get to implementation. So a plan is only as effective as the focus you can put on implementation. So implementation and then sort of monitoring and verifying where you are. So that's the iterative part of the planning process. This is a little derivative from the previous slide. So your baseline inventory is really your starting point for a climate action plan. This is where you would quantify greenhouse gas emissions. And I think this topic is a little different from what you've heard over the last couple of days, which has been very focused on discrete projects, which all have the benefit of reducing greenhouse gases. But this is where you take a comprehensive look at your reservation. For a city, it would be whatever is in their jurisdiction, and you focus on activities that generate greenhouse gas emissions. So it would be your electricity use, because that generates emissions off-site, natural gas use, the amount people drive, and the types of vehicles they drive in. I'll show a breakdown of those sources in a little bit. Once we have a baseline assessment, we do some forecasting, and it's generally based on what type of growth you might be expecting on the reservation. If there's infrastructure projects you have planned, we would account for those. So that can kind of show you what the growth in emissions might look like in the future. The nice thing here is that when we look at this growth in emissions, there's some benefits that come from the regulatory framework that's already in place around greenhouse gases. So in California, for example, we have an advanced clean car standard. So even if you have emissions associated with transportation going up, the fleet is going to get cleaner because of those regulations and the fleet turnover. So you're going to see a reduction from that, and then there might be a gap that is met through local action. I talked about target setting a little bit already, and then the strategies is where you really start to think about what are the actions you can take, what's within your authority or influence. So these can be things like renewable energy projects, on-site solar, microgrids, can be energy efficiency projects. It can be transit, so taking folks out of single occupancy vehicles and moving to other modes of transportation, more electric vehicles, zero emission vehicles, things like that. The costs and co-benefits, this is part of the CPRG requirement, but this is also something that can be included. As Ed mentioned, reducing greenhouse gases also brings other benefits. So you can reduce co-pollutants, there's public health benefits, there's reduced costs. So there's good reason to do this beyond sort of the greenhouse gas aspect. And then implementation and monitoring, and then workforce planning, we heard about this over the last couple of days too. An effective and sustainable plan is one that also plans for that workforce transition. So that's also part of the CPRG requirements. Getting to the benefits, Ed covered this a little bit, but as I mentioned, there's these external benefits you get from this type of a plan. One overarching benefit is really you get a comprehensive look at your operations and see where the opportunities lie. So once you have this plan in place, you're well placed to pursue those funding opportunities. So, you know, if there is an energy-related grant, or if it's, you know, if wastewater treatment is of interest to you, you can point back to this plan and show that you've already worked to establish the framework, and that can give you a head start on pursuing future funding. So I think that's a big one. And then what really, we work with a lot of communities where they may not specifically care about greenhouse gas emissions. It's sort of this, you know, scientific concept that may not matter, but there's other external benefits are really important to them. They may be in a high pollution burden area, so reducing emissions has the benefit of improving public health, reduce costs, reduce water use, increase local jobs, and again, on the emission side, you can also have projects that actually store carbon or sequester carbon, so more vegetation. So you can have a lot of these co-benefits come from this planning exercise. These are a few examples. These are probably hard to read, but some plans we have prepared for municipalities. The work we're doing with tribes is not quite ready to be shared publicly yet, but that will be at some point in the near future because the deadline is coming. These are for cities and counties, and you can sort of see there's different, in the case of County of San Diego, they set a net zero emissions goal, so which is very ambitious, and the Climate Action Plan, which is actually available publicly now, sets a roadmap to achieve that goal. There's also just the City of Bakersfield example, which is also in draft form still, but there's the hierarchy of strategies, measures, actions that you can take a look at to see how we structure these. I'm going to try to speed this up as much as I can, but just going to cover the components of climate action planning quickly. Climate action planning can be a really data-intensive process. It is more programmatic in nature in that, again, we're trying to get these pieces of information or data for a whole reservation or for all your facilities. These are typically the categories or sources of emissions we would cover. This may again differ based on the types of sources you have on your reservation. Transportation is a big one. I think there was a pie chart shown earlier that showed a pretty high contribution from transportation for nationwide emissions. California is a little bit different. We drive even more, so it ends up being a higher sector. You have electricity, natural gas, solid waste, water, wastewater, and then other categories can be those off-road sources, for example, any construction equipment, leaf blowers, things like that, that also generate emissions. So for each of these sources, there's two ways to reduce emissions. There's your activity. So as an example, how much electricity you use. And then there's the emission factor, which is per kilowatt hour, what is the metric tons of greenhouse gases generated. So there's two ways to reduce emissions based on that equation. You can reduce the activity, or you can reduce the emission factor, or you can do both. So your energy efficiency project will get at reducing the kilowatt hours. Your increased renewables on the grid will get at reducing the emission factors. You put those two together, you have an even higher benefit. So that's really the basic premise behind this type of planning. This is one example of the data collection process that we would go through. This can take a few months typically. It's usually the slowest part of the process because you're going to different sources to get this data. So the example here is electricity, but this is what we would do for each of those sectors that was shown on the previous slide. So I'll take the example of, say, an entity in Southern California that's serviced by San Diego Gas and Electric for electricity. So we would put in a data request to SDG&E and ask them to provide us the kilowatt hours that are being used on your reservation. And again, depending on the type of sources, there's data privacy constraints to what we can get. So sometimes what we'll get is an aggregated number versus a facility by facility number, which is fine. We can work with that. And then we would look at SDG&E's renewable portfolio and see what their emissions are based on how much renewable and non-renewable sources they have in their mix of electricity provided. And we would take that information and generate the total emissions for that sector. Public engagement is really a key part of any planning process, and more so for climate action planning, because as I mentioned, it can be a bit of this esoteric scientific concept. So we really try to break it down to a format where it's understandable, people understand why it should matter or why it matters to them, and we can really generate buy-in along the process. So this is again an example of a process for a city council, and the approach we're taking with the tribes we're working with is trying to engage youth, elders, executive management, tribal council at different junctures in the process. This is a prerequisite of the planning grants, but it also is important for the longevity of these plans. So, and we can use, again, depending on the audience, different techniques. It can be workshops, focused stakeholder meetings, digital formats for the more younger audiences. So there's a lot of techniques we can use here. And then finally, just quickly, I want to reinforce again the workforce planning aspect of this. This is a focus of the EPA grants as well. But really, these plans will be most effective if there are people on the reservation that have the capacity and the knowledge to implement them. So a key aspect of these grants is the workforce analysis. So as we have more of these plans available publicly, you'll see what that looks like, but really trying to set it up so that if we're going to transition away from fossil fuels, that can come with a loss in employment opportunities, but then complementary to that, there's more green jobs that can be generated. So making sure it's being set up in a way that is sustainable and the transition is just. With that, I will hand it over to Ed.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you. Poonam is a real expert on this, so I just appreciate working with her. We do energy solutions and kind of land use planning in a way, but we don't focus on the environmental stuff as much. We can do it, but good to have an expert doing that. I want to talk about solutions because the Climate Action Plan talks about inventories, how much gases are you emitting, where are they coming from, and then the second step is what do you do about them? And that's where you have the opportunity of getting double duty out of what you do. Reduce greenhouse gases, makes EPA happy, and also reduce your energy costs, which makes tribal citizens happy. Let's see. So there are a lot of different things. You've heard a lot of this stuff, so I don't think I want to go over too much of this. And let me just step back and say there's really two ways to look at the reservation. There's the overall plan for what the reservation is and what it's doing. And then the second is what are the things that you can do to improve that, the different projects. So you could do this project, battery, this project, that project, but they're really just projects. And they have to fit into an overall plan, because if they don't, they're just kind of disjointed things that happen there. The climate action planning gives you a chance to step back and take a look at the whole reservation and then think through what is the best way to approach the vulnerability and issues on your reservation. And we call that the 360 reservation or the smart reservation. So let me flip through some of this stuff because I've got a few points I want to make. Oh, there's heat pumps down there. That's a great one over there. Heat pumps should go everywhere. Pilar yesterday talked about two things. First of all, she talked about the different grants that are coming through, especially the Treasury direct pay program, which you need to pay attention to. But the big takeaway I got from that is how complex it is, how much you have to look at. And Pilar's our attorney too, so this is, so I appreciate hearing Pilar when she speaks, but she's giving you very, very good advice. You've got to start early if you're going after that kind of stuff. But she also talked about energy efficiency. $1 in energy efficiency is worth way more than $1 in renewable energy. It just really is, and she said that. The energy efficiency stuff that you do has the biggest payoff. very little investment for a lot of reduction in energy use. So part of your planning really needs to start with, where are you, where is your reservation in the whole process of moving towards a cleaner, greener, lower cost energy system. And these are just more things that can be done here. So we look at the reservation as an economic and social development opportunity. A tribe that has a reservation has two assets. One asset are your tribal members and your government. The other asset is the land that you have. So you want to look at that land as being your valuable asset, and how are you going to use it? You could put a solar farm on it, but is that the highest and best use? You could put a public health facility on it, but is that the highest and best use? It depends upon the needs of the tribe and the vulnerability of the tribe. Let me see if I can put a stop on this for just a second. Whoop. Yeah, let me stop on this for a second and then go into the cost ones. I've been on the Economic Development Authority in my hometown, Falls Church, Virginia. I was a founding member in 1981. I've been on the EDA for 43 years, volunteer. I could be the longest serving volunteer in the country ever. I could be. I can't prove it. I'm not going to research it. I'm just going to claim it. And when we started doing economic development in 1981, we didn't know what we were doing. We were absolute rank amateurs at it. And I had the fortunate, it was fortunate for me that I got to be chair of the EDA for about 15 years. So I got to really get deep into economic development. And we're talking about energy, but we're really talking about economic development. We're talking about casinos. We're talking about greenhouses. We're talking about we're talking about government buildings. So we're really talking about economic development. And what I learned over the years, that there are some indices that you can use that really give you the numbers so you can compare one thing to another. So we were trying to do mixed use development. So I came up with an index because I realized that what we had was land that we were trying to develop, and we needed a basis to compare projects and compare the opportunity, the potential opportunities on that land. And the index that I came up with was the dollars of taxes that we got per acre, which was a good way to compare it from one project to another. So we had an underdeveloped project where we were getting $40,000 an acre, and then a development would come in and we're all of a sudden getting $300,000 an acre. Well, that's a good return on that investment. So stepping back to the tribe, you have land also. Should you put a solar field on that property that you have here because you're going to reduce your energy costs? Well, if your energy costs are really high, and you're going to eliminate them, then yes, that's really good. But what else could you put there that might give you a better economic return? Remember that renewable energy, all the things we're talking about, there are two main benefits here. One is if you put in solar and other things like batteries, wind, you can drop your cost of energy. The second thing is resilience. You want the lights on when the power goes down. Those are the only two things. If you could get that without energy, you keep the power on, you keep your lights on when the grid goes down, and you had low-cost energy, we wouldn't be in the room talking about this stuff. But that's a problem. So there are different ways to get to the answer. One is a big solar farm. If you have a lot of land and you're not going to use it, maybe that's a good solution. But if you don't and you need healthcare facilities and it's a smaller reservation, you're really not going to go in that direction. A better way to do that is to maybe tap into a community solar project. A community solar project, which I think some people talked about here, is somebody else has the farm on their property and then you get a share of that, which really lowers your energy costs. That takes care of your energy costs. And then I hate to say this, this is sort of terrorist to say this, but maybe put in a diesel backup generator, not diesel, I would say natural gas backup generator, because you're not going to use it very much. The resilience could be taken care of by the backup generator, and the community solar could take care of your energy costs. That's just one solution. That's why I say there's lots of things that you can do, but you've got to step back and really figure out what you're trying to accomplish, and then come up with the individual projects that are really going to get you there. So let me talk about costs for just a second. These are some numbers from PG&E, the hated large IOU in California. And what they've predicted is that their energy costs are going to double or triple by 2050. The cost of energy is going to double or triple in California. That's what they say. It's not my numbers. And the previous people were talking about a tribal utility and all the reasons to do that. So I would say they give you a good argument to want to get away from this situation where you're really dependent upon the local utility. At 27 cents, it's pretty expensive. I'm not sure what you pay in California, but 27 cents is I'm sorry, in Florida. 27 cents is very, very expensive. So if you're offsetting 27 cents, then maybe a solar farm does make a whole lot of sense. If your energy costs are 5 or 6 cents, maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's other things that you want to be doing with your money and your investments. So if you're, let's assume that you're not generating the electricity for internal use. The best use of the renewable energy that you generate is to offset costs on your reservation. That's the best way to use it because you can't always sell it into the grid at a high price. In California, 27 cents, that's the retail, that's what you pay, but if you try to sell it back to the grid, you're going to sell it at the wholesale market, which is only a few cents. So you have to have an extremely efficient or very large and efficient solar farm to make that worthwhile. But just looking at that in isolation doesn't give you the answer as to whether that's a good use of your property. You've got to look at other things. So maybe it's agriculture. So if you have corn and you're going to be growing corn as an alternative to putting in a solar farm, is that a good move? Well, an acre of corn is going to generate under $1,000 per year. You can go to saffron, maybe you'll get $12,000 a year, higher product. And solar energy, if you put solar energy there and you sell it back to the grid at 1 cent, you're going to get about $5,000 an acre. So if you can't sell it for a very high number, I'd rather put the saffron in and find another way to lower my costs. So stepping back and looking at this as a land use issue, an economic issue, really gets you to the answer as to whether or not energy is the right solution, the right development project for the tribe. So as I said, energy engineers want to do energy because they're the hammer looking for the nail. But there are other things to do, and stepping back, I think, is just really important. I had another point, but it slipped my mind. Okay, just some additional information about historical numbers. Some fuels don't go up all that much, but electricity, and the cost of generating the electricity, as the previous speaker said, has not gone up very much. It's all of the other things that need to be done in order to get the electricity from where it's generated over to you. There's taxes. Now in California, there's PSES, the shutoff, hardening of the grid, and then also the sort of hidden elephant here on decarbonization is electrification. The more electrification, the more energy that needs to come from the grid, which means more transmission lines, more distribution lines, and higher cost overall. Okay. So this is a good reason to look for alternatives here because not so much the costs now. You know what the costs are now, but if the costs double or triple, especially if you've got a casino that's using $100,000 or more a month in electricity, doubling or tripling that is a tremendous hit on the bottom line of the casino. Okay, so when you step back and look at the reservation, you want to put things together that are going to have a curve that looks like this over time and prioritize those potential investments so that you get control of those costs and you're able to bring them down. And that's where we get into the 360 reservation, which I'm going to talk about right here. So if you step back, energy is sort of an underlying infrastructure. There's two underlying infrastructure across the reservation. One is the energy infrastructure. It's horizontal across all the vertical utilities, and the other is information technology, which ties things together. It's horizontal across public health, emergency management, wastewater, waste treatment, trash removal, and all of that. So energy kind of underpins a lot of things, but in order to really come up with a good energy plan that's going to preserve health and safety, stabilize communications, make sure the water and wastewater treatment plants are running all of the time. In order to do that, you need a plan that's going to end up hitting the vulnerabilities which are the most serious vulnerabilities on the reservation. So, I didn't mean to put that in there. This is just a data system that we developed to sort of manage it all. But so, do I want to go back? Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah, I'll drop it in planning. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the topic of how you prioritize those different potential investments that are going to improve public health, that are going to make sure emergency management works at all times, and so forth. So what are some of the funding opportunities? I'm only going to spend a couple of seconds on this and make 2 points. This is the greenhouse gas reduction grants and the greenhouse gas reduction fund, and Pilar talked about this one. This is the big deal, the one on the right. This is where she talked about CDFRs, Community Development Finance, AI, institutes, agencies, okay, banks, money directly. This is billions and billions of dollars. These awards are going to be made very, very shortly. Those are ones to pay attention to. And the climate pollution reduction grants are what we're talking about today. Small in comparison, but the second round, the implementation rounds, are really very big. All of the other speakers went into more detail here, gave you more information, but I just want to say there's a whole lot of grants out there. But here's my caution on this. You can't win them all. This is just a competitive landscape. Winning a grant or winning a contract really depends upon the competitive nature of that award. There are 2 kinds of awards that come to Indian country. One is the allocation. The formula grants, those are great. Just go get the formula grants because they've already pieced it out and you get the money. The ones that are competitive, I would scratch my head when I say, why should grants in Indian country be competitive? Why should tribes be pitted against each other to go compete for these grants? I have not gotten a good answer. Maybe it's because you'll do better planning or something else. And it also favors the larger tribes significantly. So the work that Sherry Smith is doing with the Alliance is so important to get that kind of help into across Indian country. It's just really critical stuff. So you want to be as competitive as the larger and well-run, like this tribe, like the Seminole tribe, extremely well-run tribe. I wouldn't want to compete with them here, and I've been doing government contracting most of my career. I would be scared to compete with this tribe. If you look at, Tommy John on the first day talked about the new Indian energy procurement that's coming out, $25 million. That's a lot of cash, but not if you spread it over 400 tribes. If all 400 tribes competed for that, how much money would each of you get? Not that much. The competitive nature of the competition is the key thing to pay attention to when you're going after a grant. If it's a big amount of money, but it's going to be competitive and open across the whole country and there's no carve-out for tribes, you're competing with San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York. That's not a fair competition. If you have the capabilities and the need for a certain kind of grant and that's in the scope of work, but they're small numbers, the chance of getting one, only a few are going to be awarded, the chance of getting one is very small. So matching up your capabilities to the requirements of the grant is not enough. The question is, how many awards are going to be made? How big are they going to be? What's the competition like for them? And should I put my time into going after, whoops, something happened there, going after after that grant? So when I say I want to give you some cautions, just because there's a lot of money out there doesn't mean you're going to be able to go get it because it depends upon that competition. And I had one other point to make, but I slipped my mind again too. This is getting old is not a good thing. Money, competition, nature of the bid. The question is, how do you find out what the competitive landscape is? That's a whole training, and I do a training on this too. But after this break, if anybody would like to chat about this just a little bit, how do you determine the nature of the competition and how competitive is that award? There's some certain things you can do in order to get that information to help you figure it out. It's not free to go after a contract or a grant. You've got to get organized. You have to take time. You have to learn it. You may have to get partners into it. And then once you get it, you've got to manage it. So there's a lot of money, but it comes with some cautions about what it takes to get it, and then finally what it takes to run it. So the main thing I want to leave here is about acting before planning. Okay. So I've been working with tribes for about 3 years, so I'm an absolute novice here. So as Poonam said, I'm very humbled to be here. My partner, Mark Harding, is Native American. He's part of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe on Cape Cod, been an elder, and without Mark, I wouldn't be here talking with you. He wasn't able to make this, but he keeps us level with working with tribes, and it's different. I have to admit, fascinating, different than working with communities. But one thing that I've realized after several years doing this is that we've never put in enough time socializing what we're doing with the tribes to get understanding and acceptance of plans that we have across the tribe. And Amy Wilson is going to be up later, who I think does this a lot better because I was talking with her. She's going to be coming up in a little while talking more about planning. But the plan that gets put in place needs to be understood broadly across the reservation and broadly across, especially across council. And people talked about that before. I'm not an expert here, so I don't want to delve into it. But I just have to say that we've run into some issues when we've taken something that we thought made sense, but we didn't socialize it well enough. So then when we came down to actually getting the grant in, that's when we ran into issues. So all of that pre-understanding just is just really critical. This starts with identifying the gaps down here and then filling the gaps. So going after a grant shouldn't be in isolation from one of these vulnerabilities. So it's not about putting a solar farm in to generate electricity, it's putting a solar farm in because that's going to reduce airborne health because you're going to be able to get off certain kinds of appliances, for example. Or the wastewater treatment plant goes down because you get a lot of floods or you get a lot of heat and you're in a vulnerable zone, and that's why you're doing it. So you want to tie the grants back to what the actual vulnerability is that you're fixing, and that's what we call the 360 resilience, the 360 reservation, tying all the grants up back into the plan so that you're meeting a vulnerability. Okay, and then if you lay the plan, then if you step back and do that, you'll have a list of projects that are tied to vulnerabilities. And then the question is, how do you go get them done? And that's where a phased-in plan really makes sense, where you've got phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And everybody understands that. It's like a comprehensive plan for energy, a comprehensive plan for energy management or controlling costs of energy, or increasing the resilience of the tribe. And then if that's all really seen, then when those grants come up, they fit into those plans, and it's much easier for everybody to say, yeah, I got that, I heard about it, I understand why we're going after that, and it really makes sense to me to do that. And what else do I have here? Okay, so here's the result of a plan that we put together. And it's sort of like the punchline here. Here are all the projects, and all of those projects tie back to a vulnerability. But when you line them up, you can see they have different costs associated with them. That says savings, but it's actually costs. And from high cost to low cost. But sometimes the low cost projects are the ones that have the most benefit because they're hitting a vulnerability. So here's one vulnerability at one tribe. They have a lot of, they're in a drought area, and so water's very precious. They do have a water source. They do have their own pipes and a utility, and a lot of meters around because they want to make sure that they're not losing any water. There are no leaks in the pipes. That's such a vulnerability to them. And the way they do it, the way they had been doing it, was that the public utilities people would go out on the trucks, and every 2 hours they'd go around and they'd look at all the meters. They'd read the meters and see if there was any leakage. So that was personnel going around. And so the top thing over here is electric meter integration. So putting on digital meters so that you could read them off of a dashboard, off of your cell phone. Tremendous impact, only $100,000. So it's using the money most effectively, which means what is it that you're fixing on the tribe for those dollars that you're bringing in. And so hitting those that low-hanging fruit has a big benefit, and it's not always the big projects. Okay, I think I'm going on too long, but it's my last slide. So if I were to leave you with a couple of thoughts, I just had a couple here. Let me just say those. How are we doing? I thought we'd get us back on track. Highest and best use. This is a land use issue. Think of saffron versus solar farms. Energy is not the problem. It's clean energy that's our problem. PG&E's electricity is going to go up 2 or 3 times by 2050. Pilar says pay attention to energy efficiency, bikes, carpools. Actually, electric vehicles, as much sense as they make, they're very expensive. You don't use them very often, and you got to throw a car away or stick the car into the used car market. Easier just to, not that I would say not buy an electric vehicle, but easier to try to extend the life of your current vehicle, but use it a lot less. Financing is, or funding is complex. Understand the competitive landscape. Energy people want to sell energy. The amount of energy we use is the issue, a little bit more than it is the source of energy. And then, as Eisenhower said, nobody here remembers who he was, World War II general, President of the United States. He said, I'll leave you with his thought. He said, plans are useless. Planning is everything, because it gives you the framework to make decisions, and even as things change, at least you've got a basis for judgment. So I'll just leave you with that last thought. And Poonam, any last thoughts?
No, I think if folks have questions, happy to field them.
Yeah, we want.
Any questions real quick before our break? Okay, get your questions ready. Kind of have a little rolling schedule here. We got all this carbs right here for you, and fruit.
Thanks. One thing to mention that it's not really a question, but just as another point is on the planning. The window just opened up for the DOE fellowship, so you can apply for a DOE fellow. A few tribes did it in the last go-round. We were one of them, and I think our fellow is here somewhere. Jacob, you heard somewhere? Yeah, so we brought in somebody that the DOE pays for, so all of the costs are funded by the DOE for a minimum of a year. They can really help plan. Jacob's been doing a lot of work as we try to figure out how to assimilate a battery system into an existing distribution system that we're pulling power off of the bulk power system. So there's a lot of work, a lot of heavy lifting. There's a lot of resources out there that are free that can help you with the planning and really kind of move this along and at no cost to the tribe, which is, Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy has been doing it. You guys listed a bunch of resources, for economic development planning as well. And it's just something that not a lot of people know of. And there were only 2 or 3 tribes out of the 40 or some fellows that they placed went to tribal entities.
Good. Hey, that is good to know. Really good.
One
Thanks,
way in
bro.
the back.
Oh, we got one in the back here. All the way from Ukraine.
I live in the United States.
Yeah, he lives in the United States, but I like his shirts. He's been wearing them every day.
I appreciate it. Thanks, and I appreciate your thoughts about Ukraine. Slava Ukraina. Just a quick statement and a request, if you don't mind. First and foremost, thank you for your time and your presentation today. I appreciate it. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of having lunch with Poonam. She probably can't recognize me because you look like a silhouette from here, so I probably look like a speck. But it was a wonderful conversation about community engagement, and I recommend everyone, if you have a chance to talk to her, what the impression I got, that her heart's in the right place, which is just as important as the knowledge, especially when working in Indian country. And that kind of relates to the request. If you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about community engagement with tribes. I've worked with several tribes on climate change plans, and the thing that always strikes out to me, the tribal communities shouldn't have to sacrifice their cultural identity, their unique cultural identity, just to address climate change. But often when you're working with outside parties, they have cookie cutter type framework or guidelines on how they develop climate change plans. And if you take the cover of the climate change plan, you take their name off, and you take the map out, you can't tell their plan from any other communities. If you could talk about that, I think that would be helpful, because our talk during the lunch was, I really appreciated it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for that, sir.
I really appreciate your kind words. And as I said earlier, I think this is where the humility piece comes in, right? We know the elements of a plan, but you all know your community best, and you have this rich history of environmental stewardship, and it's rooted in very different principles than perhaps a municipality might have. So I think that's really where it becomes a partnership. And what we're doing with the tribes we're working with, there was a statement made in one of the presentations yesterday that, you know, you don't just go in with a scope of work and say, here's what we're going to do, here's a roadmap, let's make it happen. It's really about getting to know the community. And I think some transferability we've had with the work we've done with local governments is, you know, we are admittedly outsiders in some cases. We're coming in, we can learn about your community, but you're best placed to tell us where the values of the community are, what's important to them, what might make the message resonate in a way that, you know, our technical information may not. So we partner a lot with community-based organizations, sort of, you know, in the more traditional municipality landscape, and work with those trusted messengers that know the community, that when they deliver the message in a form that the community is used to listening to, it lands a lot better and it resonates a lot more. So we can put together the strategy and the tactics, we can help convey the message. But we're also out of the picture at some point. Once we're done, you have the plan to implement, and you can have some technical assistance. But you know, that's really been an effective approach we've used, and happy to talk about it more. And thank you for the question.
Very good. Let's give these two a round of applause. Let them hear you. They'll be around. If you do have some questions for them, they'll be around here for a second. Hey, two things I want to do. Man, I'm always about plugging people, okay? First of all, if you were here on time, I'm going to give you a 15-minute break. If you were here late, you don't get a break. You just get to go back and get fruit and all that good stuff, okay? Before we do that, man, let's give them a round of applause. Hey, I want to do something real quick for us, man. Come on in here, Rich. This is Richie Rich right here. Let me tell you something. All that coffee and everything, my main man has been making this coffee for us, keeping us up to date, doing all that, like making sure, you know, that you go out there, and he's been filling it up, keeping it packed, right? But one cool thing about Rich, I mean, he's an entertainer. Last night he went out, he did a concert for a private party somewhere else, and was there for 3 hours, and a great singer, right? Today is his birthday, so we're going to tell him happy birthday. And thank you for the coffee. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday. And his name is Rich now. You. Happy birthday to you. How do you sing it? Happy birthday, dear Richie. Happy birthday to you. Round of applause, Richie Rich.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, yes. Anyway, he's going to be leaving us around 11 today, but he wanted to make sure your coffee was on point. So one more time, man, give it up for Richie and the coffee. Okay. So listen, we are going to be moving on here in a little bit, but let's go ahead. Are we going to take that, boss? We're going to take that break real quick, or you just kind of okay? So let's go take that 15 white people minutes, and then we'll come back in here and we're going to close out today. I got to leave at 3:45. I don't know about you all, but I got to leave at 3:45. Okay, so let's get that break and we'll get rolling again. Hey, and if we got to roll into lunch, that's okay. All right. So for the upcoming presenters, you got your time. Okay, so go get it. 15 minutes, we can get back in here. Here we go.